Welcome to this paper reading. I'm only going to read selections. I read the whole thing out loud prior, and it's just too long. It's too much to read off a piece of paper. So I'm going to do it apart in a few paragraphs here and there and some extemporaneous, and then we'll have some group discussion. The title of the paper is Non-Duality and the Metacrisis. A Zen koan for you. You're sitting in deep meditation when suddenly multiple smoke alarms start sounding all around you. How do you respond? You are sitting in deep meditation, abiding, equanimous, when suddenly multiple smoke alarms are sounding around you. How do you respond? Many religious, spiritual, including non-dual traditions have largely neglected, passed over the metacrisis and its overt its overt challenges as well as its spiritual challenges. And the analogy I use is imagining if I were teaching a meditation retreat on a particular cruise ship called the Titanic. And what would I do? Suddenly I heard the alarm. And I realized that it's a bit of a cheat because, from the standpoint of where I am now, I'd realize I think it was 3 hours until the ship sunk. So it's not really quite that, is it? Still, you are a meditation teacher teaching on the Titanic, and the alarm goes off. How would you respond? So, in case you are unfamiliar with the term non-duality, I'll just give you one sentence definition. It just means not two. And it refers to the fundamental non-separation of phenomena. Basically means that belying all apparent phenomena is a seamless, unbounded unity. Now, there's another word, polycrisis. Poly just means like polyphonic, multiple crises. And the polycrisis, not the metacrisis yet, but the polycrisis is the totality of the overlapping and synergistic existential threats that we face. Now, the metacrisis includes the polycrisis, but also encompasses an interior dimension of the human psyche, which relates to what we believe to be true and about ourselves and the world. So the polycrisis, the multiple overlapping crises, climate change affects global poverty, and global poverty affects climate change. So that's a synergy between so-called discrete crises, the polycrisis. The metacrisis, meta meaning to go beyond, encompasses the exterior, but also looks to the interior, which I'm proposing in part is about what we hold to be true about ourselves, the narratives about ourselves, and the stories we tell about what the world is. So, my thesis in a nutshell is that non-dual thinking, and more importantly, non-dual experience, can enhance two very important things: collective connection between humans and the more than human realm, and upgrade our coordination efforts through an upgrade in our self-sense and importantly, our meaning making abilities, which in are dire need of an upgrade. And this would help us respond better to the meta crisis. So you might ask, why did I write this paper, which I'll share with you. Um, if you're watching on YouTube, I'll just point below, just click, and there it will be, version one. And this is version one. I decided that I would release version one, put it on YouTube for you all, and make a request, which you don't have to do, but which is, would you offer some response? Because I would like to make version two in September and then finally publish the article widely. So what happened is I got three of my non-dual teachers together for an event I called the Non-Duality Roundtable. John Prendergast, Adyashanti, and Rupert Spira. Um, and during that event, I asked the question, what, if anything, can non-duality offer the meta crisis? And I got this response from an email after the event, which really resonated with me. So it said, the non-dual roundtable was a beautiful, profound discussion of rare depth and sensitivity with one major deficit. Most of the panelists, with the exception of John Prendergast, appeared not to appreciate the magnitude or the urgency of the meta crisis, or to have a good idea about how spiritual practices and practitioners could contribute effectively to working with it. I'm not a particularly depressive person, but I fell into a depression for about 48 hours because the non-duality roundtable did really well. We had, I think, 2,000 people show up, over 100,000 people watch it on YouTube, and I realized, my God, what a missed opportunity there was. And so this paper, which I'm going to now read momentarily, is my response to that feeling. Spirituality and the meta crisis. And how do they relate? And so I got to work and got to writing. So let's jump in. So I'll read no more than 3 paragraphs of each section because it just would be too much. You'd just be like, oh, please. So this first section is called Three Structures of Civilization. And then I'll riff a little off of it. So the three structures are infrastructure, social structure, and superstructures. Although you could call superstructures substructures. But here we go. Addressing the ills of global civilization at the infrastructure level is essential. We need to reinvent, how we design buildings, how we design cities, how we produce and utilize energy. This is obvious. But we must also address the partially dysfunctional, sometimes pathological social structures that too often predispose humans to things like prejudice, inequality, and endless conflict and war. Social structures include an interior dimension of our collective psyches, which borders onto the superstructure part, including our communal stories and beliefs, and our exterior civil institutions, right? So social structures such as law and education, religion, governance, and so forth. So although it's vital to address infrastructure. Obviously, we're not going to just meditate our way out of the meta crisis, although it's obvious we need to tweak our social structures as well. In this essay, we're going to focus on this third element, the superstructure or substructure, as the case may be. And I'm not talking Marxism like, relations of production. I'm talking about including our deepest seated, which are often unexamined, unconscious narratives that guide how we experience both ourselves and what the world is. So, our ideas about what reality is, right, contribute to the creation of the way we express ourselves in our infrastructure, our cities, the way we pour concrete, the way we just have massive amounts of garbage and recycling, right? Um, these contribute to the way our infrastructure and social structures appear, and in turn, our infrastructure and social structures shape us. Anyone who's been camping knows you go out in wild nature and you just feel like a different person. I would joke to my wife when we first started dating, all we did was hike. And I liked having dinners out with her or whatever. She looked more beautiful to me in wild nature. I thought she looked beautiful at dinner too, don't get me wrong. Like something changes in experience and then even at the level of story. So there's this idea of an individual, separate self. And I believe it is a misperception of identity with critical implications for the future of humanity and for the future of the more than human realm. So those are those three structures that are included in the meta crisis. The meta crisis has a lot of different definitions. So please read Daniel Schmarterberger, and there's just so much great stuff out there. I'm not offering a definitive definition. To me, it's like one of the greatest koans. What is the meta crisis? And if you know what it is, it feels like I'm the Matrix, but Morpheus speaking. If you know what the meta crisis is, instantly what becomes available to you is a responsibility, which I think is awesome. So if you leave here going, I'm not exactly sure what the meta crisis is, I may take responsibility for that, having inadequately described it, but I may also feel like, good. I wouldn't want you to go away thinking, oh, yeah, I know what that is. That's like the word total reality. I could give it a shot. I'm not going to right now. But no, 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 you can't. You can't put that into words. All right, so I outlined the three structures. So there's 8 sections. Now we're in section 2, polycrisis. I want to say a few words about this building block word and tease it apart from the metacrisis. They're not the same thing. They're not. So here we go. The polycrisis. As I said, poly means multiple, like polyphonic. Um, and crisis means crisis. So there are multiple synergistic, overlapping existential threats that we face. And it's understandable that we want to focus on the polycrisis, right? The urgent drowns out the important. So if the house is on fire, you're going to want to put the fire out as opposed to start looking for the arsonist, right? But this thinking actually is going to get us into trouble in the long term. The thinking goes, well, let's first attend to the practical matters of impending collapse, and later attend to the roots of the collapse. And I call this meta-crisis triage. It's my opinion that we need to do both. Not everybody can do everything at the same time. So I'm glad there are climate scientists doing what they're doing, ecosystem scientists doing what they're doing. At the same time, this question of the arsonist is foremost in my mind. And over millennia, we have faced as human beings civilizational collapse after civilizational collapse. History shows that on average, this is just an average, the average human civilization lasts 336 years, and then it ends. Now, one part of us may go, well, that's okay. Things come and go. But we now have a global civilization, which increases the stakes for everybody and, importantly, everything. So my question is this: what is going on with Project Civilization? Just take that in. What is going on with Project Civilization? Is there some design flaw in civilizational architecture that we keep repeating? It's not merely an issue of bad luck. Sometimes it's, Mount Vesuvius blowing up. But more often than not, it seems that civilizational collapse is a trait of human systems, not every human system, but many. And we've noticed, here on this call, or I don't think you would have showed up, we appear to be inching, or perhaps quicker than that, but I'll undersell it. We appear to be inching towards a potential global civilizational collapse. So, how does this collapse relate to this new term that I'm offering, which is metacrisis? So, as I said, metacrisis includes the exterior visible polycrisis, but it also transcends it, like Russian nesting dolls. The polycrisis is within the metacrisis, but the metacrisis actually opens up the circle of what the crisis is, including internal human distortions. It's not a sin, but it is what we do, including the internal human distortion of believing we are separate, a collective, mistaken identity disorder. Maybe it's not a disorder, but I'm going there, at least for a moment. So if we humans don't know who we are or what we are, if we actually think we're separate, actually discrete from the swimmers and from the wingeds, my goodness gracious, how many more species need to go extinct until we get it in our bones? We're not separate. We're not separate. All right, I'm going to stop there for a moment. The next piece I'm going to call the story of separation. I'm going to see if there's any question here. Is it all a design flaw? No. No. It's myriad things. Michael, if you wanna, weigh in, just unmute by what you meant, or I'll just riff off it. So I guess I'll riff off it, unless you unmute. Um, well, I'll just use an obvious one. Um, the way moderns like us live is not sustainable in the long run. So if we do care about the next generation and 7 generations, if our love, our circle of care includes humans that we're not directly related to and the more than human realm, and if we care about future generations, we cannot possibly burn up the amount of fossil fuels that we're currently using. We can't continue to increase the content of our dumps with things that take thousands of years to decompose. We cannot create toxins that will kill. That's pathological. It's murderous. It's not intentional. When I use well, I use good dish soap. I don't know, whatever. My car. There we go. When I use my car, I'm not intentionally thinking, God, I really want to superheat the earth and kill everything. But I'm part of civilization and a little lazy, not trying to be brutal, but and I use these things and we're all sort of supporting each other. Well, I'm using a car. Okay, well, I'll use it. Uh, and in the long term, it's just not going to work. It's not good for our body's health, the one body. It's great for getting me to the grocery store. It's great for getting me out into wild nature. So I'm not saying that, I'm misusing it, but the very notion that we can continue to build internal combustion engines and just keep running them is problematic. So, um, yeah, I like the stop the arsonist metaphor right now. The arsonist, big oil and capitalism, is setting more fires. I want to lean into that and say, big oil is working for us. I'm not letting them off the hook, but they're not here. And if you're here, great. Um, I just actually, so this was a great tee up, wasn't it? Um, I have an internal combustion engine car and I fill it with, the product of Shell or Esso or Mobil or whatever it is. Um, they are responsible, but I'm co-responsible. I keep buying their toxic, death-making product. Me. So, yeah, someone wrote, Big Oil is responding to our interests. I want to fill up my gas tank. Yeah. So, no, I wouldn't lay it all. I mean, I'd lay a lot at Big Oil, not letting them off the hook. But that thing, you point the finger at big oil, and three fingers are pointing back at me. What is this house electrical, heating? Anyhow, I'm going to move to the story of separation. Read a couple paragraphs. So this assertion of inseparability to a lot of people seems strange. So the joke that I use is, well, I know I'm an individual because I'm not going to pay Michael's taxes. And if I ask Michael to pay my taxes, you know what he's going to say? And he's like the world's most generous guy. He's going to say, no. Because there is some, uh, what shall we call it? Provisional functional duality, which is very important. But when we put it under the microscope at close examination, when we look at it, it becomes obvious that we are not fundamentally separate entities. That knowledge, that experience needs to be pushed up in the mix. It's like a little, violin in the background we can barely hear. Individuality is way forward in the mix. There are, to just sort of overdo it a little bit, there are precisely zero individuals. You've never met one. Only parts of greater wholes. Name one individual you've ever met, and I'd prove to you that that person is not an individual. In the cosmos, we are but part of a larger universe. In physics, we are a handful of innumerable subatomic particles. In society, we are parts of greater collectives, families and religious traditions and countries and so forth. Metaphysically, we are part of total consciousness. In theological language, you could say we are a localization of the divine. And if this sort of seems far out there, you can just remember that you've had an experience of the softening of the self sense, being in wild nature, watching a sunset. Have you ever lost yourself in a sunset or in love making or in playing music with someone or just giving yourself to a music, watching the symphony, whatever it may be? You've had a glimpse of the seamless nature of reality. One more paragraph for this section, and this is a really important one. The story of separation that I am tracking in particular in this essay is one that started to develop a few millennia ago, and I'm tracking this one. It started in portions of the Middle East and really got going in Europe and includes two main variants. Traditionalism's notion that humans have been given dominion over the earth. Traditionalism's notion that humans have been given dominion over the earth. That might have worked out better than it did, but it didn't. Two, modernity's approach to earth as a resource storehouse. So we've gone from dominion, could have worked better, but it didn't, to resource storehouse. That had no chance because it's a limited resource. Both accounts center humans on themselves and their own needs at a distance from Earth, at a distance from each other, at a distance from spirit. I'll stop there. See if there's any. Well, let's just breathe, actually. Yeah. And I'm not saying that traditionalism didn't offer some true, truth, goodness, and beauty. And I'm not saying that modernity didn't offer any goodness, truth, and beauty. Recorded music. I love it. That's an invention. I'm like, yep. Ah, great. All right. So just write your comments if you have any. Dominion was mistranslated from Arabic to Greek to English. Yeah, I wonder about this word dominion. That's why I said it could have been better, right? So I mean, I wonder what the real word was. I have come to realize I have a 15-year-old that I am to him in some ways his warden. When he eats, what's he eats? What, do I have a choice about going to school? No. What? No choice? Yeah, I'm the warden. So, I mean, there's a kind of domination. Now, I'm a real softie, so dominating is a little strong, but you get the idea. Parent, right? But it's really with a deep, deep care that I am there for his full flourishing. But here's the important thing. It's connected to the flourishing of the whole. It's not like, well, what's good for my son? Screw everybody else. Let's do everything we can do, son, to get you into Harvard or whatever it is that, is the gold, the brass ring. So yeah, Dominion. It could have been better. Stewards is perhaps a better translation. Suffice it to say, even today, in some fundamentalist circles, this word dominion is deeply problematic. And a lot of us here on this call, really, we have outgrown traditionalism. We've outgrown modernity. Not completely. There's parts of us that want to incorporate the good, the true, and the beautiful at those stages. But most of us here are postmodern or even meta-modern, which I might get to. So yeah, let's just take that in for a moment. Are there better collective narratives than humans have been given dominion over the earth? Or the earth is a resource storehouse? And if so, what would it be? Yeah, dominion does imply a deep responsibility. It implies it. Yeah. But I think, like parenting, although I have dominion, a deep responsibility with my 15-year-old, I screw it up not infrequently. Right? And so, but collectively, but I think I do mostly good, so the damage is minimal. The 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 same cannot be said for our collective dominion and responsibility over the earth. We're not only screwing it up every so often. It is an enduring and an abiding feature in the way we have chosen to be responsible. All right. Kinship, section 4. We're halfway through. Kinship, I love this word, with earth is experienced as the sense that the earth and self are co-extensive. Just feeling that for a moment. I'm using the word kinship to point to an experience, to a knowing, to a reality that so-called you and so-called earth are co-extensive. Feel into that word. Thich Nhat Hanh used the word interbeing. I'm using the word coextensive. We could call this experience, if we wish, animism, nature mysticism. The experience of kinship with wild earth is a function of the reality that consciousness is both an appearance in the world and it belies the world. Consciousness, vitality, life is an appearance in the world, a localization, and it belies the world. The fancy term for this is panentheism, not pantheism, panentheism. You can look it up later if you want, but it's not important. The truth is important. So with this understanding, we may come to know that we can see evolution isn't happening to us, but is a co-creative dance between foreground, the appearances, such as humans, and the so-called background, the total earth, or the totality of consciousness or spirit. Let you take that in for a moment. So this would be an evolutionary panentheism. That might take a little while to work out. Evolutionary, we co-create and move, hopefully grow, change, transform, and panentheism, both in and out. So rather than experiencing the earth as a dominion of human control or a storehouse to be plundered, a new evolutionary story, which I might say in parentheses, is not merely new. Some peoples have been telling this story for a long time, but perhaps new for postmoderns or moderns. A new evolutionary story that places humans as co-extensive with life would simultaneously bring a touch of humility to humanity, to our species, while inspiring us to imagine this, that we envision that we are co-midwives with life. We could collectively aspire to be co-midwives with life, for life, as life. Our future may well depend upon a more accurate and comprehensive view that does not separate so-called transcendent and immanent aspects of consciousness. Let's take a breath. If you want, you can put your one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly. It's okay to get in our heads, but we don't want to be exclusively there. There is a body, and it is part of the one body. I'll tell you a little story. When I was lay ordained in the Zen tradition in my mid 20s, I sewed a rakusu, like a Zen robe, and the abbot wrote this little poem. I don't know if it was his original poem or if he got it from, a Japanese monk from 1,000 years ago. And it was very short. It said, throughout the universe, one body revealed. Throughout the universe, one body revealed. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, you'll find out. So I've been working with that as a kind of living koan, and it just keeps getting deeper. It's like reading the Tao Te Ching. It just keeps going, and I'm like, oh my gosh. Every meditation retreat, every vision quest, every soul walk in wild nature reveals more and more the deep truth that throughout the universe there is one body revealed. Humility is ultra, ultra, ultra key. Yes, yes. It brings us eloquently and effortlessly, naturally to respect. Human arrogance. I work with it. Being a top dominant. What's the word? Anyway, top apex predator, apex species. It can get to your head. You know. Um, it can become, and I can see it with my cats. I've got two four-leggeds who live with me. Then I'm like, okay, wait a minute here. You know? Yeah, yeah, I have the opposable thumb, so I can open up the can of food and blah 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 blah. But it's like, no. And then it switches, and I become an apprentice. And I'm like, you are so much better at being. You are so much better at listening and sensing. And all of a sudden, I become an apprentice to a cat. And it just seems like they are blow my mind. Yeah, humility. I'm still working on it. But that would be like a very key. Yeah. Hmm. And more to say. I'm just taking a pause. All right. The section is called Living as a Non-Separation. And for those of you who are really like love non-duality, Advaita Vedanta, for instance, or Zen, um, this is a bit of an indictment. Um, Even though I'm a Zen practitioner and I love my traditions, I also want to be critical of the way that some of us um, approach it. Too many spiritual journeys, especially so-called non-dual journeys, adjourn with a peaceful detachment or an exclusive devotion to the transcendent divine. Too many spiritual journeys end with a peaceful detachment. I'm not saying all of them do, or a exclusive devotion to some kind of transcendent upper world or heavenly divine figure, I recommend a different finale. Not just love of the unmanifest infinite, which is awesome, but a passionate engagement with material existence. I call this non-dual responsibility, engaged non-duality. Our spiritual practices, meditation, prayer, selfless service, can precipitate a collapse of the separate self sense, where foreground and background collapse as separate entities. I know this just from being a parent. I would rather him have the, not always, sometimes I'm selfish, but I'd rather give him the choicest strawberry from the pint because he, my son, feels coextensive with me. His joy is essential to me. But how about the kid across the street? Transcendent and immanent cease to be experienced as exclusively discrete phenomena. Feel into that. The so-called transcendent and the so-called immanent cease to be regarded and cease ultimately to be experienced as absolutely distinct or separate. Now, some spiritual traditions emphasize interconnectedness from the get-go. Now, there are parts of Eastern wisdom traditions that do this, but there are parts of indigenous wisdom traditions that do this right from the very start. In fact, their cosmology is based on it. They emphasize the full, seamless nature of reality, but in a very embodied way. And I think paradoxically that the story of interconnectedness and non-separation are one. Both perspectives help reveal the inherent sacredness of life by softening reified boundaries. Nothing is necessarily added to transform materiality into the sacred. There's just a dissolution. And without that distortion, we are life falling in love with itself. And what we fall in love with, we are responsible to. I met my son for the first time at an airport. 10 months old, adopted from Korea. And there was the big Korean airline jet. I mean, literally, this is how it happened. And he comes out, and I didn't immediately recognize him as my son. I mean, I could see the picture. I could see it was him. And I took instant responsibility. But it took my wife, it was instant. You're my son. What? She started crying. And it took a process for me. And I think this happens for other fathers and parents too sometimes. But I remember the moment where it felt culminated, and it was naming day. About 2 years old, he had adjusted to English, I guess, and he called me Dada. One word, two syllables. And I was like, it wasn't just like, oh, he spoke his first word to me. It was like, I'm your father. I'm like, I know it in my bones. I've been acting like it. And as time goes on, more and more, I've been feeling it. And so I'm not genetically related to this person. He is my son. I can embrace the paradox. Am I genetically his father? No, I'm not Korean. Am I his father? Yes, I know it. Am I related to all of the wingeds? Uh, when I say related, I mean first generation, second generation, no, no. We'd have to go pretty far back in my family tree to see that I'm related to a hawk. But as it turns out, if you go far back enough in science, we are related. And even if we weren't to use science, even if we we're just to open our hearts as the aperture for connection, we are related. The cycle of care, did I say cycle? The circle of care can continue to widen. You can adopt. You can adopt life until it doesn't even feel like an adoption anymore. I no longer feel like, oh, yeah, this is my adopted son. So it was an interesting experience that I'm glad to have shared with you. Let's see if there are any comments before I go to the next one. Hmm. We are the intersection of the physical and the energetic. I like the image of individuals as localizations. Yeah, you know that water metaphor I used. I think of us as slowed down consciousness. If water is fluid and quick and when it freezes into this shape for hopefully 80 or 90 years, we'll see how long this one sticks around. It's slowed down, it's localized. It's still just water. It's still just the divine. It's still just the unbounded. But it temporarily takes this form and melts back in, like the wave in the ocean analogy, and is always itself, water, always. All right, 3 sections left. Oh, and only 15 minutes to go. I might skip one or two then. Let's see. I'll just say this one quickly. Two varieties of non-duality. One of my teachers likes to talk about the consciousness first model. And I love it to an extent. I had a few arguments with him, but anyway, the consciousness first model says that consciousness is sort of the a priori, and everything else is a so-called emanation or modulation of consciousness. There's some truth in that. However, you go too far with that and you get in huge trouble. You don't even care about the metacrisis. And I've seen this happen. You could say, and then he says, yeah, the matter first model, that's just crazy. There's no matter. Da, 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 da. I'm like, okay, but here's a third one. The earth first model. I'm not making this up. I mean, I'm calling it this. This is not my original work, right? The earth first model is earth is the a priori reality, and we are temporary modulations and emanations of this fecund, conscious earth. I don't think any story is going to be adequate. Consciousness is first, matter is first, that's, hard materialism, or even my earth first. But I think if we include them all and find some way with them, I think whenever we take our stake and go, this is it, this is the final truth, like it's one non-dual teacher I'm picking on, I think we get into some big trouble. I really do feel, and this is why I wrote the paper, that my non-dual, community, let's call it Neo-Advaita Vedanta, has been asleep. That we're not including non-dual responsibility. So let's go back to India. They understood something. I'll share it with you. Two words, moksha, meaning liberation, dharma, which has 1,000 meanings, but I'm going to go with duty or purpose or destiny or service. Some people go hog wild for moksha, moksha or bust, including the world's, most famous deadbeat dad, who is one of my teachers, the Buddha. hop at the wall, didn't say goodbye, didn't come back to visit, and abandon his responsibilities for moksha. I'm not saying that was, well, I guess I am kind of saying I am judging him, so I'm not going to try to get out of that. Um, okay, all right, there it is. Dharma is responsibility. Dharma, in part, and this would have been what I would have said to him if Siddhartha Gautama had asked for my advice. He could have said, well, my dharma is to go for moksha and then to be a teacher. And I'd be like, great, but visit your kids once in a while, or at least say goodbye to them so they don't think you're dead. Dharma is responding to life and its needs. It's calling. What is it calling you to do? And the Buddha could have said, well, it's calling me to just meditate. Hmm. And that has been a through line to some degree in some monastic traditions and even today. And I cry foul. I'm like, okay, let's put them back together because they were never separate. Let's have a hyphenate word, moksha dharma or dharma moksha. Liberation, responsibility, responsibility, liberation. That excites me about 10x more. I'm an enlightenment guy. I was 12 years old and I knew that was it for me. But simultaneously, when I had this vision at 12, it was also about responsibility to the earth, healing and repairing the earth. They co-arose for me. It was a strange day in junior high, facing the lockers. And those two things, as I was contemplating my life as a deep little kid, and I was like, what is this life for? And those two things came up. How can I heal and repair the world? In Hebrew, tikkun olam. And how could I be adequate to being an actual helper of that? Oh, yes, to be liberated, to be enlightened. And they're not separate. They're not just people who are activists, although there are. And they're not just people who are interested in moksha, although there are. And so 24 years ago, I started Green Sangha, spiritually engaged environmental action, moksha, dharma, liberation, enlightenment, responsibility. If you're only responsible, you're going to potentially wear out pretty quick and burn out. I'm responsible for everything. Oh, good Lord. No, you're not. That's too much. You will get crushed like a bug. Oh, no, it's all just about truth. And it's an illusion. All right. Last section. Solutions. But I actually like the word responses better. But for reasons I won't go into, I wrote the word non-dual solutions. A colleague of mine has this little shorthand. Wake up, grow up, show up. Wake up to moksha, liberation, enlightenment. The truth about you at the level of essence. That you are the unbounded, undivided spirit. That's what Zen was taught me, for instance, amongst other things. Grow up uh, points to, I like to say, being a grown-up assed adult, which is no easy feat. That itself, quite aside from any other thing, like, I've been married 27 years. I'm like, oh my God, when am I going to be a grown-assed adult consistently? I'm getting better at it. There's a lot to be said there. Um, but I want to point to the responsibility, non-dual responsibility. Jonathan, such as he is not responsible for healing and repairing the world. It's too much. It's too big. I'm not smart enough. I don't have enough energy. I don't have enough health. Blah. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. That's too much for an ego personality to bear. I have met a few people. I see one of them here on the call, who non-dual responsibility has occupied their very being. Soul level purpose is the way I put it. You're responding to life, not to everything. That's impossible. So you're showing up with your dharmic responsibility, what I like to call soul level responsibility. Carl Jung calls this your unique myth. Bill Pockman calls it your mythopoetic identity. When I was 20, I was on a meditation retreat and I had a vision, and the vision was I was named, like my son named me, Dada, and then Daddy. Um, Whole person midwife was the name. I was like, oh, that is so much more accurate than Jonathan. I got it. Each person has a soul name. Everyone has it. Everyone has a unique myth. Jung wasn't like, yeah, only a few lucky people have that. And my unique myth is never going to, I mean, not never, but probably almost definitely not going to play out on a big stage at the level of Carl Jung, who will be remembered and I won't be. Great. Well, he's a super genius and I'm not. But that doesn't mean the I can't contribute, that I don't have a unique myth to live into the world. I do and you do. And that's what I'm speaking to when I say, you who love non-duality and you who cares about the metacrisis deeply can know that you're not just responsible. It's not just non-dual responsibility. It's non-dual dharma. It's the myth that takes you. I am held by the unique myth that embodies me. I don't have to do the work, thank God. It's just what we're meant to do. It's embracing your destiny. You can discover that in destiny, integrate it, embody it into the world as your gift to life. Frederick Buechner said, you will find God. You can find God in the place where your deepest gladness and the world's deep hunger meets. You will find God, the divine life, in the place where your deep joy, your deep passion, the place that's energized in you, and the place that you are called, the ache of the world that you're designed for. That's where you'll find God. Liberation, moksha, and dharma, your unique mythic responsibility. All right. Well, I had 20 other things I was going to share. Well, I will share the paper with you. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can click below and read it if you'd like. And here's my request. This is version 1.0, and I'm scheduled to do a writer's retreat in late September. I would love to solicit your feedback about non-duality in the metacrisis, where you think I'm on the right track, so I can kind of go more in that direction, where you think I'm missing the boat. I would love just be direct and honest. It can be a good conversation on YouTube. I've seen it. I've seen others where people just, but in this group, I don't think that's going to happen. So please, I hope you'll offer your contribution so that it's not just coming only from me. I'll be the, chief writer of it, but I'd really appreciate your leaning in, taking a few moments to offer a comment or two or suggestion. Um, Practically, I have a couple suggestions. One, get out into wild nature. If you're like, well, wait a minute, that was all very heady. Now what do I do? Three things. There's 10, but one, get out into wild nature and just be quiet. Let Earth occupy you. I don't really need to say more than that. Um, Two, meditation is really beautiful. It can help soften and dissolve this separate self sense. Three, make a prayer. What is my soul level purpose? What is my unique myth? What is my mythopoetic identity so that I know how to be responsible, how to enact non-dual responsibility in my unique case? So those are the three practical things that I want to suggest. Thanks for your listening.